In the fall of 1995, a young couple vanished from a remote lakeside cabin in Northern California. Eric and Dana Whitmore, both 27, had just married 3 weeks earlier. It was supposed to be the honeymoon they'd never forget, and it was, just not in the way anyone imagined. Their car was gone, their phones were off, and the cabin, though neat, held strange details. The bed untouched, groceries still in the bags, and Dana's hairbrush broken in half on the floor. For years, the case went nowhere. No suspects, no sightings. Only a mother who wouldn't stop asking questions. Then in 2007, 12 years later, a construction crew breaking ground for a new road hit something unexpected beneath the soil. Metal and bone. September 14, 2007. The sun had barely crested over the rooftops of new construction when Jake Brenner started his shift. Just outside Cedar Lake, Indiana, a subdivision was being carved from what had once been a patchwork of farmland and forgotten pasture. It was supposed to be a routine day, clearing brush, leveling terrain, digging trenches for utility lines. Nothing exciting. The heat was already building by mid-morning, one of those late summer days that sits heavy on your skin and turns topsoil into clay. Dust clung to boots, and the whir of diesel engines echoed across the flattened plots. Jake, a 17-year veteran contractor, had seen it all. Rocks, old trash pits, the occasional animal skeleton. So when at exactly 10:43 a.m., the hydraulic arm of his backhoe shuddered to a stop mid-sweep, he didn't think much of it. Probably a tree root, maybe a long-forgotten fence post. He reversed the arm and heard it again, a sharp metallic scrape like steel against steel. "We got something," he called over the engine noise. Jake killed the ignition, grabbed his gloves, and jumped down into the dirt trench. The soil was denser here, packed hard with time and tangled with root systems. But what caught his eye wasn't the resistance. It was the color. A smear of dull green, almost camouflaged against the earth. Not natural, not pipe, not rock. Paint. Oxidized, flaked, streaked with rust and clay, but unmistakably automotive. "Get shovels," Jake said, his voice low now, more curious than concerned. He and 2 other crewmen worked by hand for the next hour, cutting carefully around the shape. As the outline emerged, so did the unease. It wasn't just debris. It was a frame. A car. Half submerged. Crumpled slightly on the passenger side. Windows gone. Tires rotted to wire, but still intact enough to hold its story inside. One of the crewmen stepped back and whispered, "This wasn't dumped here. It was buried." And buried on purpose. It was a 1993 Mazda Protege. Deep green, compact, sunken into the earth like a coffin. Nature had tried to claim it, but enough remained for one crewman to mutter, "This wasn't just dumped, it was buried." The roof was collapsed inward, the front grille crumpled, windows long gone. Inside, the driver's seat was empty, but the passenger seat wasn't. A skeleton sat slumped against the center console, ribs caved in, arms tangled awkwardly across the seatbelt buckle. Tufts of sun-bleached fabric clung to the bones. What looked like part of a bridal sash hung limply from the collarbone. The crew backed away. Jake called 911, but as the sheriff's office began taping off the site, a deputy peering into the rear of the car noticed something else. The trunk had been forced shut with a cable, rusting, frayed. It took bolt cutters and a crowbar to open it, and inside, another skeleton, smaller, curled inward, arms bent unnaturally behind the back. No clothes, no ID, just bones, just silence. By 2 p.m., the Cedar County Sheriff's Office had cordoned off the site with bright yellow tape, the kind that flaps and hums softly when caught in the breeze. Deputies posted up at both ends of the access road. Curious neighbors and construction supervisors were kept at bay. Photographs were taken. Evidence flags fluttered across the uneven dirt. The vehicle identification number, barely legible through corrosion, was carefully cleaned and recorded by a forensic tech kneeling in the dust. It was run through the national database. The result came back in under 5 minutes. Registered owner, Daniel Whitmore. License plate last active, April 1995. A deputy glanced up from the screen, his brow furrowed. He read it again. Then he said the name aloud, and every head turned. It had been 12 years. 12 years since Daniel and Mara Whitmore, a young couple married less than a week, had checked into a lakeside cabin near the Indiana dunes and never checked out. They'd been on their honeymoon. The last known photograph had been taken by a gas station clerk near Michigan City. Mara smiling from the passenger seat, window rolled halfway down. Daniel holding up 2 fingers in a peace sign behind the wheel. After that, nothing. No crash site, no phone calls, no credit card activity, not even a roadside clue. Theories flourished over the years. Some said they'd staged their own disappearance. Others whispered of carjackers, serial predators, or that they'd drowned in the lake and were simply never found. But there was no evidence, just a cold void where 2 lives had once glowed with newlywed hope. Until now. Until the green Mazda was pulled from the earth like a relic, its rusted bones refusing to stay silent any longer. And in that moment, the silence broke. A case long buried in rumor, in sorrow, in the soft fading grief of time, ignited. Not with answers, but with the promise that they were finally coming. When the car was unearthed in 2007, investigators didn't just reopen the case. They re-entered a moment, frozen in time. The last confirmed location where Eric and Dana Whitmore were seen alive was a private honeymoon cabin nestled in the woods near the Indiana dunes, less than 10 miles from where their car was just found. It had been their dream getaway, quiet, secluded, surrounded by trees and lake air. Detective Rowan Bishop ordered the original police report pulled from storage. It arrived in a weathered file box, the folder marked in faded black ink. Whitmore, 1995, missing. Inside, brittle yellowed pages, a few grainy Polaroids, handwritten notes in tight cursive. The author, Deputy Alan Kessler, now retired and living somewhere in Arizona. Back then, he had been the first to respond to the missing persons report. His first sentence in the log entry still struck like a bell. It looks like they walked in and walked right back out. The details painted an unsettling picture. Dana's suitcase was standing upright just inside the bedroom door, still zipped. The retractable handle hadn't even been extended. Eric's duffel bag lay beside it, airport tag still hanging, flapping slightly in the open window breeze. The bed was untouched, the comforter perfectly smooth, not a single crease on the pillow, no scent of detergent, no evidence of sleep. In the kitchen, a plastic grocery bag sat on the counter, handles looped tight. Inside were items so ordinary they now felt jarring. A box of Frosted Flakes, a bag of rotini pasta, a loaf of Wonder Bread, a jar of peanut butter, 2 apples, all sealed, all unspoiled by time, thanks to the cabin being shuttered shortly after the disappearance. Even more chilling, the refrigerator still ran on backup solar. Inside, a bottle of champagne, nestled on the top shelf in its gold foil, still chilled to the touch, unopened, untouched, uncelebrated. Every corner of that cabin whispered intention. The trip had just begun. They were going to unpack. They were going to cook dinner. They were going to toast the start of something sacred. But something had stopped them. Not abruptly, not violently, but with enough suddenness that nothing was disturbed. No sign of panic, no overturned furniture, just a quiet interruption, a vanishing act without a sound. Detective Bishop stood in that cabin 12 years later, her fingers brushing dust off a windowsill, and said quietly to her partner, Whatever happened, happened fast. And whoever did it never expected this place to be seen again. But now it had been, and the past was no longer quiet. And then came the details that didn't belong. The first red flag was found in the bathroom. Sitting on the counter, beside an unopened travel-sized bottle of shampoo and a tube of lipstick, was Dana's hairbrush, snapped clean in half. The plastic handle was fractured down the middle, and the bristles were bent backward, not like they had worn out, but like they had been ripped mid-stroke. Several strands of her dark hair still clung to the base, tangled and pulled. It didn't suggest carelessness. It suggested interruption, violence, restrained and fast. A moment of sudden panic. Under the living room couch, investigators recovered Eric's wallet. It was open. The leather had dried and curled slightly from the years, but the contents were unmistakable. No cash, no credit cards, just a few scattered receipts, his driver's license, and a small photograph folded in half. When Detective Bishop unfolded it, she paused. It was a picture of Dana, in her wedding dress, laughing, mid-spin, mid-sentence, clearly taken when she didn't know the camera was watching. A candid, intimate, the kind of photo you keep close. Someone had taken the valuables, but left that. A choice that felt pointed, personal. In the kitchen, the furniture seemed ordinary at first glance. A modest wooden table, 4 chairs, at least there should have been, but only 3 stood around the table. One was missing, not moved, not broken, simply gone. There were no drag marks on the floor, no scratches, no overturned pieces, just an obvious absence, a square of undisturbed floor where one chair should have stood. Detectives later confirmed the chairs had come as a set, custom-made by the cabin's owner, heavy, unstackable, not easily misplaced. So why was one missing, and where had it gone? Then, near the cabin's coat rack, something else caught an officer's eye. A men's hiking boot, size 11. It was wedged awkwardly, as if it had been kicked or dropped hastily. But it wasn't Eric's. His shoes were found neatly by the bed, size 9.5, brown loafers, well worn from travel. This boot was different, newer, heavier, designed for rough terrain, and there was only one. In isolation, these might have been oddities. Together, they told a story, one the cabin had been trying to keep quiet for 12 years. Back in 1995, with no bodies and no clear sign of forced entry, the local department concluded the case with 3 words: likely voluntary disappearance. The couple had chosen to leave, chosen to vanish. That was the official narrative. But Marla Jensen, Dana's mother, never stopped pushing back. Dana would never leave groceries still in the bag, she told a reporter in a quiet press conference held in her backyard the summer after the disappearance. She made lists, labeled shelves. She ironed socks. Marla had fought to keep the case alive, holding candlelight vigils every anniversary, writing to senators, even launching a short-lived website to collect tips. She said the cabin had always felt wrong, too still, too staged. For over a decade, her voice was drowned out by silence. But now, in 2007, with metal and bone rising from the dirt, the world had a reason to listen again. And the cabin that never made sense suddenly meant everything. The remains were taken to the Cedar County Coroner's Office under heavy seal. Technicians worked in silence, aware that every bone, every scrap of fabric, every fragment of rusted metal could be the thread that unraveled a mystery 12 years buried. The first skeleton, found in the passenger seat, was mostly intact, though badly degraded by time, soil pressure, and moisture. Still, the fractures told a clear story. The jawbone was shattered. Several ribs were snapped clean through, not from decay, but from trauma. Blunt force delivered with intent. It wasn't the kind of damage you get from a slow-motion burial or a car left to rot. It was the kind you get from a struggle, a fight, a death that didn't come easy. The second skeleton, found curled in the trunk, was smaller, lighter bones. Pelvic structure suggested female. She had been placed there deliberately, knees folded, spine compressed, like cargo, or like someone had wanted to hide. There were no signs of trauma on the bones, but the body had been wrapped in something. Plastic fragments, now fused into the fabric of her clothing, were found clinging to the femur and shoulder blades, a crude attempt at preservation, or concealment. She was still wearing a ring, a delicate silver band with a small heart-shaped crystal set inside. On the inside, worn but legible, were 4 engraved words: "Forever starts today." Marla had described it in her first missing persons statement. It wasn't expensive, she had said, but Dana loved it, said she wanted something that would remind her of day 1, not just day 50. The ring was photographed, cataloged, and tested. Lab results returned 2 days later. Skin cells trapped beneath the band were matched to a profile submitted by Dana's parents during the original investigation. There was no doubt. The woman in the trunk was Dana Whitmore. But the real question, the one that kept investigators awake at night, long after the car was cataloged and the bones tagged, wasn't about how the couple had died. It was about what happened between them, and who else had been there. Because the man in the passenger seat, the skeleton slumped awkwardly against the window, jaw split, ribs cracked, had a name. Eric Whitmore, the husband, the groom, the man who had vanished with his wife less than a week after saying, "I do." He was identified quickly through dental records and a surgical pin in his left knee from a skiing injury 5 years prior. And yet, the position of his body didn't make sense. If he had been murdered alongside Dana, why wasn't he in the trunk too? Why was he seated upright, as if he'd been a passenger, not a victim? Had he been forced to drive before being killed? Or had he fought for control and lost? What unsettled detectives most were his hands. Both showed microfractures, hairline cracks in 2 metacarpal bones, and old bruising around the knuckles. The coroner noted it clearly. Injuries consistent with repeated blunt force impact, likely defensive or offensive trauma, could result from punching a solid object or a person. In simpler terms, Eric had fought. Not with a gun, not with a weapon, with his bare fists, and he'd done it hard enough to break himself in the process. Forensics then turned to the rusted floorboard, scanning beneath the seat rails for trace evidence. That's where they found it. A tooth, loose, embedded in grime, almost missed during the vacuuming process. But it was there, jagged, partially cracked, discolored with age, but intact enough to run comparison scans. And the lab confirmed it within 48 hours. Not Eric's, not Dana's. Someone else had been in that car. Someone who left a piece of themselves behind in a struggle they thought they'd buried. This wasn't a double murder. It was a collision of love, violence, and panic. And someone had walked away from it, bleeding, toothless, unpunished, until now. The report was blunt force trauma, likely defensive in nature. Victim likely resisted attack. Eric had fought, and for 12 years that fight had stayed silent, buried, until the ground gave it back. The skeletal remains gave the case its first breath of clarity, but it was the microscopic evidence, the kind that hides in seams, shadows, and silence, that flipped the investigation upside down. Inside the 1993 Mazda Protégé, forensic techs began a meticulous examination of the cabin. The fabric of the seats was nearly fused to the metal by rust and decay. The floor was caked with layers of hardened soil. Every square inch had to be softened, swabbed, and stripped in a controlled lab environment. And that's where they found it. Carpet fibers, threadbare, compacted beneath the driver's seat, and more telling than anyone expected. At first, it was just a speck of dried tissue, less than half the size of a fingernail, pulled from the inner lining of the trunk lid. Then, a few hours later, another trace sample turned up, caught in the underside of the driver's side headrest. Each was submitted for mitochondrial DNA analysis, and both came back the same. Male, not Eric. It wasn't just contamination. This wasn't the kind of incidental DNA that floats on fibers or sneaks in through a breeze in a lab. This was contact DNA, deeply embedded, layered in sweat, skin cells, and friction. The forensic team zeroed in on two key areas. First, the steering wheel. Under the cracked leather, in the tiny grooves where fingerprints fade and dust gathers, they found biological residue, minute traces of epidermal cells, not belonging to Eric or Dana. Second, the lining of the trunk, specifically the interior lip where Dana's body had been wedged, knees drawn in, head turned awkwardly against the wheel well. On the metal rim and along the fabric inside the trunk lid, they found the same partial profile. Skin contact, not airborne, not accidental, not from a handshake 3 days earlier. Someone had gripped that wheel, loaded that body. Shut that trunk. The lab confirmed what detectives already feared. The DNA didn't belong to Eric. It didn't belong to Dana. It belonged to someone else, a third person. The sample was too degraded for a full match. Time, heat, moisture, and rust had done their work. It couldn't generate a direct CODIS hit. No name, no mugshot, no easy arrest. But it was enough for one chilling conclusion. There was a third person in that car, said Detective Bishop. Someone who wasn't buried. Someone who walked away. And if that someone had been clever enough to avoid capture for 12 years, the real question was, would they slip through the cracks again? Or had the desert finally stopped keeping their secret? Investigators constructed the timeline again. Dana had been placed in the trunk, likely post-mortem. Eric, severely injured, had ended up in the passenger seat. Neither had been the last to touch the wheel. That person, the unknown male, had driven the car, had steered it off the dirt road, through the tree line, and into the pit where it would sit, buried for 12 silent years. He wasn't an accident. He wasn't a witness. He was the thread that unraveled the entire story. Someone loaded Dana's body into that trunk, Detective Rowan Bishop said at a press conference. And based on Eric's injuries, we believe he watched it happen. He may have been dying, but he saw. And for 12 years, the evidence had waited for someone to listen. Now it had spoken, and the trail was no longer cold. His name hadn't surfaced in over a decade, not in police records, not in tip lines, not in casual conversations with reporters or investigators who had long since boxed up the case. But now, with fresh DNA evidence, a missing chair, and a tooth that didn't belong to either victim, one name, quietly buried in the early files, resurfaced like oil through cracked earth. Travis Langley, Dana's older brother, 7 years her senior, once a protective figure, now a ghost threaded between half-truths and disappearing details. He'd started his career as a construction foreman, known in the Cedar Lake region for managing large crews and always cutting deadlines close. By 2007, he had become a land broker, flipping properties along the Indiana-Michigan border. He was known for his charm, too polished, too eager, the kind of man who shook your hand just a little too long, who said your name 3 times in a sentence, like he was branding it into your trust. Hell of a guy, some would say. Smart as a whip, always gets what he wants. But behind the charisma was something else. Controlled warmth, calculated memory, and silence about the one question he never wanted to answer. What really happened to your sister? In 1995, Travis had played the doting older brother at Dana and Eric's wedding. He gave a toast, laughed in all the right places, hugged his new brother-in-law with the kind of force that read somewhere between affection and ownership. Then he offered them a gift. "I've got a buddy with a cabin up by Cedar Lake," he said, "owes me a favor. You two can have the whole place to yourselves. Private, remote, romantic." Dana had smiled. Eric had nodded. Everyone clapped. At the reception, Travis personally handed them the keys. There's a photo from that moment. He's standing between the bride and groom, holding the keys up like a magician about to reveal a trick. He's grinning wide. But his eyes? Not on the photographer. Not on Dana. Not on the future he was pretending to toast. They're looking just past the frame. At something, or someone, we were never meant to see. When Eric and Dana vanished, Travis cooperated fully. Told police he hadn't seen them after the reception. Claimed he left early. Said he never heard from Dana again. There was no reason to doubt him. Until now. In 2007, as part of the reopened investigation, Detective Rowan Bishop requested archived phone logs from Dana's old carrier, a task nearly impossible before modern digitization. But a technician working with the FBI's cold case support unit uncovered a line item that had been misfiled under the wrong area code. A single call, 2:14 a.m., April 22nd, 1995, the night Dana and Eric vanished. The call came from Dana's mobile phone. It lasted 11 seconds, and it was made to Travis Langley's landline. No one had asked about that call in 1995. Now, they did. When brought in for questioning, Travis seemed unbothered at first. Wore a crisp polo, drove up in a leased SUV, still had that handshake, still smiled. Detective Bishop laid out the timeline, described the injuries, described the partial third DNA profile, male, present in the driver's seat and the trunk. Then she dropped the phone record on the table. "Why did your sister call you at 2:14 in the morning?" "I don't know," he shrugged. "I was asleep. I don't even remember a call." She leaned in. "You didn't even ask who it was when you answered?" "I don't remember answering." "It lasted 11 seconds. Long enough to speak, not long enough to argue." He shifted in his seat. His left thumb started tapping the edge of the table. Then she pulled out the ring. Dana's wedding band. Still engraved, still silver, still holding bits of her DNA beneath the band. She didn't say anything, just slid it across the table. Travis looked at it, and for the first time in the interview, he flinched. Just slightly. A twitch of the jaw, a blink that came too fast. Detective Bishop noted it. Didn't press, didn't need to. Because sometimes, guilt doesn't confess with words. Sometimes it speaks in seconds, like 11 of them. The detectives waited. They gave him space, time, opportunity. 3 interviews over 10 days. But Travis Langley never cracked, never confessed. When pressed about the phone call, he said he didn't remember. When shown the DNA results, he claimed contamination. When asked why his story didn't match the timeline, why 8 hours of his life after the wedding had no confirmed alibi, he asked for a lawyer. And that was the end of cooperation. He refused a polygraph, stopped answering calls, and within 6 months, packed up and moved to Oregon, quietly selling his home in Cedar Lake and leaving behind the town where his sister had vanished, and where her bones had finally been found. The district attorney reviewed the case, the bones, the DNA, the 2:14 a.m. call, the missing chair from the cabin, the defensive wounds on Eric. But it still wasn't enough. Too much time had passed. No murder weapon, no eyewitness. And the third DNA profile, though incriminating, was only partial. It couldn't rule out every possibility. The DA closed the folder. No indictment, no trial, no justice. At least not the kind that came in handcuffs. But Marla Jensen, Dana's mother, wasn't finished. She didn't want revenge. She wanted the truth spoken aloud, on paper, under oath. So she filed a civil suit, wrongful death. In a courtroom far smaller than the one she'd dreamed of, Marla sat across from the man she had once called family and listened as he stumbled through his own memories. The deposition tapes became legend in Cedar Lake. Langley, once so composed, sweated through his shirt as attorneys pressed him about his timeline. He misstated the date of the honeymoon cabin rental, forgot what day the wedding was, claimed he was home, then later said he was at a friend's, couldn't explain why his sister had called him at 2:14 a.m., or why her DNA was mixed with his on the trunk liner of a buried car. At one point, when shown a photo of Dana and Eric smiling on their wedding day, Langley's hands visibly shook. "Did you love your sister?" the attorney asked. He hesitated. "Yes." "Did you kill her?" "No." "Did you help cover it up?" Silence. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. They ruled in Marla's favor. Langley was found civilly liable for Dana's wrongful death and Eric's unlawful disappearance and injury. He was ordered to pay $1.2 million in damages, money Marla never expected to collect. "I don't want his money," she said outside the courthouse. "I just want his name in the record, next to hers, where it belongs." No prison time, no televised trial, but still, a judgment, a verdict, a stain, a shadow that would follow him forever. Because some names don't get cleared. They just get recorded in black and white. They were buried together, Eric and Dana Whitmore, side by side, beneath a canopy of cottonwoods in a cemetery that overlooked the very lake where they had planned to swim, hike, and toast the beginning of their life together. A life they never got to finish. A honeymoon that became a headline. A love story swallowed by silence, until the ground gave it back. Their headstone is simple. No dates, no scripture, just 7 words, etched deep into polished granite, taken before the sun could rise. Every year on April 21st, the day they were married, Marla Jensen drives out to the lake. She still brings 2 roses, one red, one white, and a letter, always handwritten, always folded in thirds. Sometimes it's a few lines, sometimes pages, always addressed the same way, to Dana and Eric. She reads them aloud. She tells Dana about the world, how the phones got smarter, how the town finally got a second grocery store, how Cody from down the street got married last fall. She tells Eric she wishes they had more time, wishes she knew him better, that Dana had picked a good one. She tells them their love mattered, even if it was short, even if it ended in dirt and silence, even if the justice system never gave them the closure they deserved. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come in sirens or headlines. It doesn't storm in with breaking news banners or courtroom applause. It doesn't always wear a badge, or hold a gavel, or end with a mugshot and a closing argument. Sometimes, it's smaller, quieter, something the world overlooks but grief never does. Sometimes, justice is a mother who won't stop calling the sheriff's office, even after they stop returning her calls. It's a cardboard box under the bed, filled with old receipts, faded photos, and a key she never returned. Because she couldn't. It's roses left at a grave no one visits but her. Every year, on the day they should have been celebrating an anniversary, not mourning a memory. Justice is the way she stands alone in that cemetery, whispering updates to 2 names etched in stone, telling them the seasons have changed, that someone finally listened, that someone finally cared enough to dig a little deeper. It's the kind of justice that doesn't change headlines, but changes hearts, the kind that catches in your throat. And sometimes justice is nothing more than a headstone, simple, unadorned, that catches the morning light, just right, where the wind moves through the trees as if to say, "You were seen, you were loved, and you will never be forgotten." Justice sometimes is personal, etched in stone and whispered on the wind.